Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight's show is all about something that you may never have heard of, but has had a tremendous influence not only on Freemasonry, but on occult thinking throughout Europe and indeed the world. Have you ever heard of the Order of Knight Masons of the Elected Priesthood of the Universe, also known as the Ellis Cohen, which means elected priests, of course? This was part of the Martinists' order, which was made public in 1761, the theurgical and magical branch of Freemasonry. We have to go into the history of this, and it's actually fascinating. The European Enlightenment had given birth to occult Freemasonry and the Rosicrucian order. This was, of course, in 1610. Then we have the Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio. If you want a potted history of the Rose Cross, the Rosicrucians, and how influential they were in thinking at that particular time and indeed today, you can check out an article called The Rosicrucian Mystery, and that's in inverted commas, mystery, by the way, because there's no mystery about them at all. There's a mystery on the surface, but the actual workings of this order are very, very simple and clear. And they can be seen in the new environmental cult of sustainable development, for instance. Of course, go back to the Georgia Guidestones commissioned by an R.C. Christian. They were blown up about 18 months ago. We did a show on that. But they wanted to keep the earth in perpetual harmony and perpetual balance with 500 million people. Or was it 500,000? Well, the globalists want the global billion. That's in their biodiversity assessment of 1995. But 2 to 3 billion in the meantime would be sufficient, living at a very frugal standard. And we can see that coming. We can see that coming with the restriction of all of the assets on the planet. We're not just talking about electricity. Sustainable development controls everything for the banks and the so-called elites. So when we talk about this doctrine, we have to bring it into the present, because that makes it actually resonate and actually makes it important. So let's go into the European Enlightenment, the birth of occult Freemasonry, the Rosicrucian order. The European royalty, the elite, became infiltrated and obsessed with Kabbalah and occult Freemasonry. The doctrine actually revolves around the fall of man, the brotherhood of Cain, and the fallen angels, whose demonic spirits are said to be trapped on and inside the earth. Their hatred of humanity, because of course they were cast down to earth and they interbred with the daughters of men, all of this stuff is part of this belief system that these fallen angels, because they were part divine, are the essence of Freemasonry, and the god of Freemasonry is Lucifer. But their hatred of humanity is their unifying force, and their ultimate goal is destruction of what they see as us, the lesser race. Freemasons will of course reject this, but it is in their writings and traditions. We're going to be elucidating on that in this show. Their master temple builder, Hiram Abiff, is said to be descended from the gods, not God, the gods, son of the Elohim, the angels, the fallen angels. Therefore, Hiram Abiff is part supernatural. He is part fallen angel. After he was assassinated, he was interred in the same place as Adam Kadmon, the Kabbalistic heavenly man, a divine light without vessels, a supernatural being, charged with being the archetypal man. And he was there, in Kabbalistic terms, to protect and cultivate the mythical Garden of Eden. Adam was known as their jack of all trades, the jack of all trades of the Elohim, also known as Atum, the Egyptian demiurge, and of course Hiram Abiff. These are all one and the same person, according to Robert Amberlane of the Elected Priests of the Universe. Thus, the ultimate identity and identification of Lucifer and Adam Kadmon are one and the same according to the Freemasonic doctrine of the Ellis Cohen, the elected priesthood of the universe. Did you elect them? No, they elected themselves. These Knights of the Universe study Kabbalah and the Zohar, the Kabbalistic books of splendor, written in the 13th century by Moses de Leon, also known as Simeon ben Yochai. In Robert Ambolane's book, Martinism, History and Doctrine, it states the true soul of Freemasonry must not be depicted according to the man enrolled under its banner, but rather according to the tradition it claims to hold. This tradition holds that its god, Lucifer, and the brethren are the adopted sons of Cain. They are the order of the serpent and the head of the snake. They are universal, including the European, Asiatic and African brethren. From the gods of voodoo to the serpent gods of Hinduism, this universal global cult encompasses all. Even so-called Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg was influenced by Kabbalah, in particular by a Bavarian magician known as Chaim Samuel Jacob Falk, who was also known as the Baal Shem of London, and also Dr. Falcon. He was a rabbi, a Baal Shem, a Kabbalist and an alchemist, according to his write-up on Wikipedia. The Baal Shem is a Kabbalist. Baal Shem are claimed to heal, enact miracles, perform exorcisms, treat various health issues, curb pandemics and epidemics. Oh, where was he? Oh, of course, he died a long time ago. Where was he the last couple of years? Protect people from disaster due to fire, robbery or the evil eye, foresee the future, decipher dreams, and bless those who sought his powers. In Judaism, similar figures arbitrated between earthly realities and spiritual realms. Since before the establishment of Talmudic Judaism in the 3rd century, however, it was only in the 16th century that the figures were called Baal Shem. It is publicly stated that Falk, the Baal Shem Tov of London, was a neighbour of Swedenborg, and there is some evidence that he had a significant influence on him. I was looking at a book last few days, which was very obscure, and it was written by this lady who's done loads of research on this subject. I might try and get more information on it, but I read several of her essays, and she's linked together these European Illuminati lodges and how they were operating and their influence not only on Christianity but on Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg. She's written a whole volume on that. Very fascinating. Of course, it's all put down as a bit of a conspiracy theory, but she's a very respected academic and researcher. Fascinating stuff. So, many stories exist regarding Falk's extraordinary powers. According to one account, Falk made secretive visits to Epping Forest in his carriage, where he is said to have buried some treasure. Well, there's a lot of things buried in Epping Forest, I think. On one of these occasions, apparently a wheel came loose from his carriage on the Whitechapel Road. But the wheel miraculously followed his carriage, his coach and four, all the way to Epping Forest, so legend says. Another legend says when Falk ran short of coal, he was said to have performed a magical feat involving 3 shirts and a ram's horn. Falk was also able to keep candles burning miraculously and to transport objects from one place to another. Some claimed that he had saved the great synagogue in London from fire by writing something in Hebrew on the pillars of the door. Another rabbi, Jacob Emden, accused Falk of being a Sabbatean. He had also been accused of sorcery. And all this was going on around Whitechapel in London sometime after 1736, when Falk arrived in London. He actually lived at 35 Prescott Street and also at Wellclose Square until his death on the 17th of April 1782. Well, getting back to the Kabbalists, they had won over the minds of the elites in Europe. The Illuminati lodges throughout Europe were a network of huge influence and, conversely, huge secrecy. The notorious Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt was one of the many Illuminati lodges and is perhaps notorious merely just for the public eye. There is a veil of secrecy covering these other Illuminati lodges. The European aristocracy became obsessed with Kabbalah and fronted their orders as Christian. So here we get this thing called Christian Kabbalism. It's an absolute oxymoron. The two cannot coexist. Just as the words judo and Christian cannot exist. There is no such thing as Judo-Christianity. There is no such thing as Christian Kabbalah. Well, this all appeared and was the case with the Rosicrucians and of course their resurrected Messiah or Lazarus, which is based on the story of the Rosicrucian resurrection of Father R.C., based on the story of Lazarus with the rose. That's where the rose cross comes from. And of course that masqueraded as a Christian sect, which of course it wasn't. It was just there to cover its real aims and objectives, which were always Kabbalistic and never Christian. The Kabbalah as an instrument of magic and infiltration was under cover of Christianity during the 1700s as it is today. Kabbalah and Christianity are not connected and can never be. Kabbalah is anti-Christian by definition, and you will see what I mean by that as we explore the elected priesthood of the universe. So the Rosicrucians, the Ellis Cohen and the Illuminati lodges of Europe were fully infiltrated and ruled by Kabbalah, and it became the basis of all Freemasonry. Christian scholars interpreted Kabbalistic ideas from, it says in Robert Ambolane's book, A Distinctly Christian Perspective Linking Jesus Christ, His Atonement and His Resurrection to the 10 Sephiroth, the upper 3 Sephiroth to the hypostases of the Trinity and the other 7 to the lower or earthly world. Of course, there is no connection between this and Christianity. The early Christianity had nothing whatsoever to do with Kabbalah, and the early Christian Gnostics were never Kabbalists. It's a false premise, and due to the enthusiastic minds of the Enlightenment being fully infiltrated by this occulted system of, well, basically mind games. Alternatively, this is also common knowledge. I think you can find this on Wikipedia. They would make Kether the creator or the spirit, Hokmah the father, and Bina the supernal Mother Mary, which placed her on a divine level with God, something the Orthodox churches have always refused to do. So you can see that the Kabbalists were subverting Christianity. The only purpose of Freemasonry for the last 2,000 years, it started in 43 AD, by the way. Take a look at The Force They Fear, and you can download a book called The Dissipation of the Darkness by G.S. Lawrence on the free books page at windowsontheworld.net. That is a fascinating testimony as to what Freemasonry actually was for. The destruction of Christianity. And, of course, Freemasonry was only officially incorporated around about the 1700s, but it goes back a lot further than that, and we're going to get into that in this show. So, all things come from the Trinity because that is the fulfillment of creation. Nothing to do with Kabbalah. Apparently the Franciscan friar Raymond Lull, who lived 1232 to 1316, was the first Christian to acknowledge and appreciate Kabbalah as a tool of conversion, although he was not a Kabbalist, nor was he versed in any particular Kabbalistic approach. He was not interested in the possibilities of scholarly Jewish influence, which began later in the Renaissance. He was interested in new interpretations of Kabbalah, and this was solely for the sake of theological debate or argument with what he called religious Jews. Good point, but by acknowledging it, the very soul is degraded into the Kabbalists' demonology and ritual. That's an aside from me, by the way. Later Christian Kabbalah is mostly based on Pico della Mirandola, Johann Reuchlin and Paolo Riccio. A few attempts have been made to revive it in recent decades, particularly regarding the alleged Neoplatonism of the first 2 chapters of the Gospel of John, but it has never entered into mainstream Christianity. So, having said that, and having introduced the subject, let's now look at what Freemasonry is actually about in their own words. Revelations 12:9. We'll start with this. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. The Lucifer spirit is the god of Freemasonry. The self-elected master priests of the universe state on a Freemasonic website called the Freemasonic Trowel, the Lucifer spirit Samael united with Eve and begat a semi-divine son, Cain. As he left Eve before the birth of the child, Cain was the son of a widow and a serpent of wisdom. So this is where we get the cult of the serpent and the brotherhood of Cain. And their blind god is Samael, the Lucifer spirit. So the sons of Cain are ruled by fire. They like to call themselves the Illumined Brotherhood. They are Luciferians. They work alongside the sons of Seth, who are ruled by water, their priestcraft, to control the sons of Abel, also water, whom they believe through their manifesto and biblical interpretations are docile, compliant, and follow the self-appointed leadership of the Brotherhood of Cain. The story of Lazarus raised from the dead holding the rose, which was to become the symbol of the Rosicrucians, is important, as he was also son of a widow, as of course was Cain. According to the Rose Cross, the rose is a symbol of the alchemical blending of the fire of Cain and the water of Abel. Examples of this in modern day life are sustainable development run by the banks, which are ruled by fire and administrated by the administrators and the agents of this system, which are water. The earliest references to Freemasonry in Britain, well, what were they? Well, actually, it's the Regius manuscript of 1390, and it states that the craft, Freemasonry, came into England in the time of good King Athelstan. Well, when was King Athelstan born? 4th of September 925 AD at Kingston upon Thames. He died in Gloucester on the 27th of October 939. In Dr. Richard Rawlinson's 1733 list of lodges, we have Scots Mason Lodge number 115, which met at the Devil Tavern, Temple Bar, London, and first appeared as Scotch Masons Lodge. It continued to appear in engraved lists of lodges until 1736. The official first recorded Freemasonic lodge met at the Goose and Gridiron in London in 1717. This is, of course, where we have the Grand Lodge in Great Queen Street in London. The incorporation on that building says 1717. And of course, as the Freemasons say, Freemasonry is not a secret society, but a society with secrets. The most famous and most influential is the Scottish Rite, which originated in 1753 and is connected to both Rosicrucian Freemasonry, Illuminist Freemasonry and the Ellis Cohens, and also Martinism. You'll find out what Martinism is as we go along. Occult Kabbalah aligned with Templar Freemasonry in the 1700s. This was the modus operandi of all Illuminati European lodges. The Teutonic Knights, the Knights Templar, and the notorious Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt. All these lodges have connections to and with the Order of Knight Masons of the Elected Priesthood of the Universe, also known as the Ellis Cohen. The Martinists' order, which was made public in 1761. So, what is Martinism? Its name is derived from that of Louis Claude de Saint Martin, a great mystic, he's known as, and a powerful Illuminist living in France in the 1700s. He wrote many books under the name of the Unknown Philosopher concerning our nature and our relationship to the universe. Through him, the traditional Martinist order is linked to a tradition with roots going back to the primordial tradition, at a time when humanity was privileged to unite itself freely with the divine without any intermediary. Well, that's the cover story. It needs to be noted that the term Martinism as we commonly perceive it, has come to apply to two people, both Martinez Pasquale, his doctrine, and also the teachings of the Martinist order founded in 1886 by Augustin Chaboseau and Gerard Oncaus. Of course, Martinism came out of France, as did the Ellis Cohens. Martinists study the natural relationships that exist between the divine, the universe, and humanity, according to their PR. No other branch of Masonry has had the influence of Martinism, and that is, of course, the subject of this show. Now, think about that. Martinism, something most people have never heard of, has had more influence on Freemasonry than any other lodge, any other incorporation, anything Kabbalistic. So, Martinism is at the heart of occult Freemasonry. Well, according to Ellis Cohen acolyte Robert Amberlain, in Lamartinism 1643 to 1943, History and Doctrine, it actually been written, I think, in 1946 by Amberlain, it states that the rite of Ellis Cohen is the one which has won over the most, yet carefully preserved the secret of its mysterious works. There you go, a public and a private face, the real and the stated goals. The initiation ceremony states, "May you, my brother, justify the words of the Zohar." That's the Kabbalistic Book of Splendor, written by Moses de Leon in the 12th century, in case you didn't know. "May you, my brother, justify the words of the Zohar. Those who are possessed of the divine knowledge shine with all the splendour of heaven. Those who teach it to mankind according to the ways of justice shine with the stars for all eternity." Robert Amberlain states in his book, "We do not wish to ignore the fact that all Western magical and Kabbalistic traditions are for the most part Jewish. We simply ask them to heap the same discredit on a religion with masters and a divine hypostasis, which the majority imprudently claim to know of, called Christianity." So there is a derision of real Christianity within this order. These excuses for the use of initiation into demonology, necromancy, yes, this is true, they engage in all of these things. And of course the rituals are very common throughout the Ellis Cohen and Martinist tradition. So we're going to have a very short break now. I've been going 26 minutes already. This is fascinating, isn't it? I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. I've been researching this for quite some time. There's an article actually you can go to called "A Cult That Rules the World?", which is like the modern version of Martinism and the modern version of the Rose Cross, Max Heindel's resurrection of the Rosicrucians in the 1800s, along with the original Rose Cross. So that will give you some background if you want to know a little bit more. So I'm just going to have a quick break and I will be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. That was called Salve. It's from the soundtrack of The Heretics of London, the Smithfield Martyrs, which you can still purchase and download on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net if you're into history, and I know I am. I find this stuff absolutely fascinating, and we're bringing it into the present. We're bringing the past into the present here. So let's have a look at a timeline before we get into the initiators of Martinism and the Ellis Cohen. We need to have some context. So, yes, the official date of Freemasonry in Britain. This was the 24th of June 1717. 4 London lodges assembled at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House and institutionalised a non-operative Freemasonry when they established the Grand Lodge of England and elected its first Grand Master. When the Premier Grand Lodge was formed, there was still only 2 degrees in Freemasonry: entered apprentice and fellow craft. Of course, later there were 33 degrees through the Scottish Rite. This is, of course, all linked to Kabbalah. In 1732, an English lodge, apparently and appropriately named Loge de l'Anglaise, was founded in Bordeaux, France. This lodge was later chartered by the English Modern Grand Lodge and still exists today. The French Grand Lodge at Paris, the Grand and Sovereign Lodge of St. John of Jerusalem, acting with a body of the superior degrees, that's the Council of the Emperors of the East and West Sovereigns, the Mother Lodge, issued a patent to the Grand Inspector, Mr. Morin, authorising and empowering him to establish perfect and sublime masonry in all parts of the world. Around 1763, Morin created and promulgated a Masonic rite of 25 degrees, which he called the Order of the Royal Secret, or the Order of Prince of the Royal Secret. So here we have these titles and this allegory and this fake mystery which is put out to the public face of Freemasonry. According to Ellis Cohen, the Rose Cross and Freemasonic sources which I've looked into, they say that mystical, chivalrous rites, occult in nature, arose in France, which probably played an important part in the Great French Revolution. Well, of course, the Grand Orient Lodge in France was behind the Great French Revolution. And I've just found another book on that, which is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to give you some quotes from that as we get along. Officially, the first Masonic Lodge in France was founded in 1688 by the Royal Irish Regiment of Foot Guards, later known as the Regiment of Walsh of the famed Irish Brigade of France. Now, they use these long titles so people can't remember them. A little bit like the European royalty, they would have many titles. They wouldn't just have one title. They would be the Duke of Sussex, but they would have, for instance, they would have lots of other kind of minor titles. So this was a very good way of confusing the public and historians as to what these people were doing and where and when they were doing it. Very important point now. But the Order of Knight Masons of the Elected Priesthood of the Universe, also known as the Ellis Cohen, and the Martinists Order, was founded in 1761 officially. Only Master Masons were admitted to the lodges of the Ellis Cohen, so they had to be at least initiated into the first 3 degrees. Those are the degrees of obedience of Freemasonry. In other words, once you come out of that coffin after the 3rd degree and you have been initiated into the Brotherhood, there is actually no going back. You have taken an oath to the Brotherhood of Cain. The Ellis Cohens teach advanced ceremonial magic. Now, according to that book I was referring to, which I only just found today, I've only just kind of leafed through it. There will be more to come on all of this, I promise you, because it's so important. It's called the Synarchy Movement of Empire, the French Revolution of 1789 to 1815. International Exercise in Purgative Violence by Pierre Boudret, 2005. Very interesting. It starts with, as Lyndon LaRouche reported, The French Revolution from 1789 until 1815 had been run by the synergist Freemasonic order of Martinism and was used as the Venetian stiletto of Lord Shelburne and the East India Company in order to prevent the French population from establishing a republican nation state following the model of the American Revolution. So they didn't want that. The first general aspect of this cult pertains to the quasi-Christian Aristotelian eruptions of pseudo-knowledge, very well put, known in its crude form as Gnostic, Manichaean, Cathar cult of blood and soil, whose revival in the 18th century originally gave birth to Martinism. So Martinism was born in the 18th century, but it goes back to the 17th century. It gave birth to Martinism, and whose specific characteristic of satanic worshipping gave birth to the beastmen of the French Revolution, the first politically organised terrorist, children of Satan, known as the Terror. The second aspect relates more specifically to the source of religious terrorism of the 18th century French Enlightenment, centred essentially around the writings of Claude de Saint-Martin and Joseph de Maistre, both of whom represented themselves as Delphic expressions of Christian spiritual exercise. So here we have the Luciferian doctrine of Freemasonry, as usual, hiding behind this Christian facade. The third aspect of Martinism deals with the modern form of theocratic and emperocratic synarchy, the design of Saint Hervé de Valvaldère, which was nothing else but an explicit attack against the Peace of Westphalia and of its governing physical principle, an attack against the American form of a constitutional republic and also Islam. The Martinist degrees, now let's get into Martinism. They have a degree of Zerubbabel, and that is a very high degree in Martinism. And let's put this into context. Zerubbabel built the temple after captivity with trowel in one hand and sword in the other, according to the Martinists. All degrees were to be kept in their worlds from the eyes of the profane. So in their own world and in their words, the order was to be kept from the eyes of the profane. So in other words, it had a public face and a very secret face, as it still has today. This order is still in operation. The temple degrees were Grand Master, Ellis Cohen, Knight of the East and Commander of the East. The Porch class degrees were Apprentice, Companion, Master and Grand Elect. Also, the degrees included Grand Architect and Grand Elect of Zerubbabel. Their secret degrees were titled Rose Croix, French for Rose Cross, Rose Croix. The Grand Architect was to expel the powers of darkness by means of magical ceremonies performed in groups as well as alone. These are from the Cohen text. That's what I'm reading to you from. This is the result of the research that I've been doing on and off over the past couple of years on the Ellis Cohens. I did one show on it a few years ago, and it's always been in the background because it keeps coming up, and now we can see why, because it's so important in Freemasonry. The concern, say the Ellis Cohens, was the bridge erected over the river Sisyphus, which the initiates had to cross on their return to Eleusis. They aimed to commune with worlds beyond, and by means of magic, demonical power for the earth's aura, they did it in secret. So what they wanted to do, their cover story was to chase demonical power from the earth. Yet in secret, the Rocroi degree was to evoke and manifest what they call the celestial powers. The Grand Elect and Select Master degrees are known as Vengeance degrees. There, the candidate learns of the fate reserved for what the Cohens call bad brethren. This, within this degree, is the symbolic putting to death of what they call traitors. Let's compare this with the first 3 degrees of Masonry, where the temple builder's name, Hiram Abiff, is a secret word, and you get blindfolded, put in a coffin, brought out, and they beast you, basically. They push you around, and you have to promise never to give away the secret word. This is the initiation into the mind control and the fear-induced compliance of Freemasonry. And of course, even conventional Freemasonry has these punishments. If you want to know what a Freemasonic punishment is, take a look at Roberto Calvi, who was found hanging from Westminster Bridge in the 80s with his pockets full of pound notes. Now, when you think about it, how can somebody be hung off Westminster Bridge in the busiest city in the world, one of the busiest cities in the world? How can this happen? Well, it happens with the complicity of those who have the power to do it. So, yes, Calvi was known as God's banker. Take a look at it. Very interesting. So, Grand Elect, select master degrees known as vengeance degrees. The candidate learns of the fate reserved for what the Cohens call bad brethren, the symbolic putting to death of what they call traitors. Well, they call it symbolic. How many people have been killed by this order? Well, we wouldn't know because it's a secret. And of course, the Cohens say this was to physically recharge their obedience to the order. This, they say, is why what they call traitors, bad brothers or perjurers of obligations, means people who don't go along with the wishes of the lodge, and occasionally the adversaries of Freemasonry, have all ended tragically, even without direct human intervention. So here we can see the threats of theurgy and the magical side of Masonry. I'll read that out again. The adversaries of Freemasonry have all ended tragically, even without direct human intervention. Well, this indicates the pure demonic wrath dished out to those whom they despise or who are seen as betrayers of their order. So now let's get into Martinism, the system of the Ellis Cohen, which was derived from the works of Louis Claude de Saint-Martinez, a French Illuminati of the 1700s, and he published anonymously under the title of The Unknown Philosopher. Then we have Martinez de Pasquale, a Spanish Jew and Catholic converso from Grenoble in France, who was born, wait for it, Jacques de Livron Joachim de la Tour de la Casa Martinez de Pasquale. He was born in 1727. So these are the two names behind Freemasonry. Both have Martinez in the title. So now let's carry on. I have seen it stated that de Pasquale could have been a Sabbatean Frankist, as there are links between the Ellis Cohens and Sabbateans. And he was the founder of the Order de Chevaliers Masons Ellis Cohens de l'Univers, commonly now referred to the Ellis Cohens, and this was in 1761. Pasquale's father was born in Alicante and held a Masonic patent which had been passed down to Pasquale, the son, originating from Charles Stuart, the King of Scotland, dated 1738. For 20 years, from 1754 to 1774, the year of his death, Pasquale worked ceaselessly to establish and promote his order of the Chevaliers of the Masons of Ellis Cohens of the Universe. In 1754, he founded the chapter of Scottish judges in Montpellier. In 1760, he founded the Priests' Temple. In 1761, the Lodge of the Elect Scottish Perfection. In 1763, the Order of the Royal Secret. This was actually with Etienne Stephen Morin, who we mentioned earlier, in France. By 1770, the Ellis Cohen were in many French cities, and Pasquale dies in Port-au-Prince, Haiti in 1774, and there is still a Cohen Lodge in Haiti to this day. And the last official representative of the Ellis Cohen died in 1868 officially, but we have to remember that Pasquale's cousin was Master Armand Carnet de Lestere, and he was General Secretary of the Navy in Port-au-Prince, and he died in 1778. So we have this revival which came later with Robert Amberlain, who wrote this book about the Martinists, which I am referring to in some of these quotes. So after World War II, Robert Amberlain formed the New Martinists of the Ellis Cohen. The 1886 revived Martinist order was founded by Augustin Chaboseau and Géraudon Casse. I think we've already mentioned that. Sorry, I've got some notes here. And we also have a later version in 2002 known as the Order Rocroi, which still exists today. We're going to get into that as we go along. Now let's look at the position of women in the Ellis Cohen. The women in the Ellis Cohen, if they were allowed to be initiated, were symbolic. They were symbolic as the embodiment of Eve's temptation. So here we see something very important about the role of women and what they thought the role of women should be within the Ellis Cohen. There is a book that's been reprinted recently called The Green Book of the Ellis Cohen, also known as the Algiers Manuscript, and it contains rituals for the invocation of demons, to bring them under control and also to vanish them. Can you see what the problem could be here? Summoning demons for the use of control is extremely dangerous. I think that we can see why these people were unleashing so much trouble. So, the Ellis Cohen, the Order of Knight Masons, elect priests of the universe, is a theurgical organisation founded by Martinez de Pasquale. It appeared in France in the second half of the 18th century and is the first branch of Martinist tradition, otherwise known as Martinism. The Ellis Cohens translates, of course, as elect priests and was intended as an elite esoteric Christian order for Masonic associates of the founder Martinez de Pasquale. The purpose of Freemasonry, also known as the mysterious force, was, as we've said earlier, to counter the power of the earlier Christianity. Well, of course, like many of the esoteric masters of the Enlightenment era, Pasquale bore several different titles which no doubt perpetuated the confusion around his identity, all this of course deliberate, and contributed to his character as something of an enigma. We have to remember that the Rose Cross described themselves as a mystery wrapped in an enigma. This is of course to keep people interested on a superficial level of mystery, which distracts them from the inner workings of the order. Of course, the Rose Cross have the 12 brothers. Behind the 12 brothers, like a triangle, going backwards like a triangle, like snooker balls, is the 13th brother, who is always hidden from view. A little bit like the real force, the 33rd degree Freemasons. The people who are at the top of these lodges are never revealed. Of course, it was believed and is known that the Pasquale was Jewish, his family were of Spanish origin, and they converted to Catholicism. So it's very likely that as a Sephardim converso, that Pasquale was also a Sabbatean Frankist, and there is quite a lot of evidence to give that credence. Once he became known in Masonic circles around the 1750s, there is far more information to draw upon, most notably his establishment of the Order of the Knights Masons, the Ellis Cohens of the universe, in 1767. Now, officially, this is interesting. Get this. The focus of the order was on establishing an invisible church, independent of any earthly structure. to find the path that leads to the hidden knowledge in nature in anticipation of the coming destruction of the material church. Well, we can see that happening. That is an ongoing process. Not quite finished, but it is a major achievement for Freemasonry. And simplified, they followed a progressive initiatory tradition similar to other esoteric or Rosicrucian orders that offered a system that would lead to direct knowledge of God to obtain the primordial unity lost since the fall of Adam. And we have to remember that their Adam is Adam Kadmon, the Kabbalistic man, the fulfillment of what their Masonry is all about. So here we see the links to Kabbalah, which link the Rosicrucians and these esoteric orders. The order was worked as a high degree system based on the Blue Lodges of Freemasonry. The first sets of degrees were generally Masonic, but the third were blatantly magical. There was use of exorcisms against evil in the world generally and in the individual specifically. So as these people got possessed, they also had to exorcise themselves. In the highest degree, the Rokra, the initiate was taught to use theurgy to contact spiritual realms beyond the physical. Pasquale's mystical philosophy was contained within his work. It's known as the Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings into Their Original Estate, Virtues and Powers, both spiritual and divine. The system involved communication with spirits, angels and other celestial beings, perhaps with echoes similar to Elizabethan Enochian workings of John Dee and Edward Kelly. The aim was to enlist the help and support of these entities. His teachings include what they call Judeo-Christian traditional themes, but from an esoteric viewpoint with Kabbalistic, Hermetic and Gnostic influences. This is their bill matter, by the way. After his death in 1774, Pasquale's doctrine was continued by his most devoted followers, Jean-Baptiste Villemoz and Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. You can see how confusing it all is, can't you? So we've got several people here called Martin. Pasquale's philosophy and rituals were to influence more than a handful of other esoteric or paramasonic orders, including the rectified Scottish Rite or Chevalier Beneficent de la Cité Sainte. Right, yes, that's in brackets there. A reformed variant of the Rite of Strict Observance. Yes, there was also Count Cagliostro and his Egyptian Rite of Freemasonry, which was rejected by some of the Ellis Cohens. And of course we have the Order of the Superior Order of Martinists, established by Geraudin Casse and Augustin Chaboseau in 1884. De Pasquale initiated 5 members of the order from 1821 to 87. The order was deliberately diffused and became more secretive, and the initiations after this, after 1821, were done on a one-to-one basis, so they weren't done in a lodge. It was a little bit like the early Rose Cross, who said one day you could be the subject to a tap on your right shoulder, and that right shoulder would be a brother inviting you into the lodge. This was the preface to the Rosicrucians, and also came before their manifesto, the Forma Fraternitatis. Of course, there were 3 different things which were put out. One was, the Forma Fraternitatis. I'm doing this from memory, by the way. There was the Confessio, and then there's the Alchemical Wedding by Johannes Valentin. And you can actually download those off the internet. They're very allegorical, and they are indicative of the cover story versus the real story. So Robert Amberlane, actually the author of this book about Martinism, he formed the New Order of the Martinists of Ellis Cohen in 1946. His book is fascinating, I have to say. It is couched in the usual terms, but underneath it all there is a genuine need for knowledge. But of course, it is clouded by the mystery of the real and the stated goals. That's all I can say about that. And the new Order of the Rose Cross, as we said, was established, the Rocra, in 2002. And actually it's worth mentioning this because the Order Rocra, or the ORC, was founded in 2002 by a group of Norwegian Martinists. And according to sources, the teachings of the order are based on three pillars: Christian mysticism, Kabbalah and Martinism, as established by Louis-Claude de Saint Martin, Martinez de Pasquale and Jean-Baptiste Villemos. These are the big names of Martinism. Of course, we had the initiator Louis-Claude de Saint Martin, then Martinez de Pasquale, who was initiated and instructed by de Saint Martin, and Jean-Baptiste Villemos. These people were elites. They were part of the aristocracy, the European aristocracy, and integrated into the royal families of Europe. Well, as opposed to many contemporary Martinist orders, the teachings of the ORC, both current and forthcoming, are based directly on the teachings of the former, it says here. So, it is thus transmitted within the framework of Christianity. So you can see here what they're doing. It's outwardly Christian, but of course it has nothing to do with Christianity. So, within the framework of Christianity, the order invites all men and women of desire, of goodwill, and a belief in a divinity independent of religious denomination. The ORC is an international order with its Grand Lodge in Norway and jurisdictions in Sweden, United States, Canada, Argentina, Spain, Greece, Brazil, and England. The Green Book of the Ellis Cohens is the most fascinating insight into the secrets and mysteries of the 18th century's most esoteric of Masonic societies, according to the publishers of this book, which has just been re-released. It says this pioneering English translation of the Cohens' grimoire, known as the Manuscript of Algiers, details the inner workings and highest degrees of Europe's first ever magical order, representing the inner circle of most Martinist streams of Freemasonry today. The Order of the Ellis Cohens teach an advanced form of ceremonial magic. Original rites of the Ellis Cohens instruct the initiate in how to enter into relations with angelic entities which are sympathetic to man's fallen state and who can aid him upon the path to reintegration with the divine. According to the publishers of the Green Book of Ellis Cohens, far from the everyday festivities of mainstream Freemasonry, the Ellis Cohens were spiritual warriors engaged in magical combat with angelic and demonic entities. Their stated goals and the use of necromancy, plus the initiate learning the names of 2,400 demons. Yes, I've been looking into their initiation rites today, plus hundreds of other names, and of course the 72 demons. They have to memorize all this stuff. And of course their publicly reproduced rituals appear to be for the summoning and control of demons, but that's just what they're saying in public. And the real purpose is, of course, never disclosed. But Robert Amberlane states, the destroyed temple, which they worked so hard to rebuild, was not that of Solomon, but that of the purely celestial Jerusalem, that which truly justifies its Hebrew signification. I would say in conclusion that the true Israel is not the place it is said to be today, and Jerusalem is hidden in a distant land. The question is, did the elected priesthood know this all along? So, in summing up, I would say that this branch of Freemasonry are indeed the most illumined and the most influential in the whole of Freemasonry. They managed, through their lodges, to infiltrate all European countries and indeed the world. And the Ellis Cohens are indeed a universal brotherhood of elected knights or self-elected knights. Now, not many people talk about the theurgical branch of Freemasonry, this magic, and you have to ask yourself why. There are hundreds of books on Freemasonry which tell you absolutely nothing. Their gatekeepers are everywhere. Indeed, the person who exposed the rites of Freemasonry first of all was Captain Morgan in the 1800s, who was murdered by the Freemasons. This is all known. So, when we look at the way the European aristocracy were drawn into Kabbalah, we could say that this was indeed the downfall of man, but they were doing it to attain Godhood, communion with their Godhead, and Adam Kadmon, the divine man. So, this belief system is very prevalent. It's infiltrated pretty much everywhere and everything, and its influence can be seen all over. The question remains, will Christianity and the force which these people fear be destroyed by this Luciferian brotherhood? It hasn't been so far, and there are encouraging signs that it never will attain true domination. We have to look at the role of the United Nations. We have to look at what we call sustainable development, the Agenda 2030 goals. These are merely an update of the order out of chaos, which has been the ongoing plan, which is their order. It is their order from chaos. And of course, the great architect of the universe for them is Lucifer. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm finding this fascinating, and it's there for a purpose. It explains an awful lot. For those who listen to Windows on the World, it will make a lot of sense, and it will put more and more things into context. That's what these shows are about. If you can support the show, please do. I did make a request that people put in £5 a month. You can email me at info@windowsontheworld.net. I can give you details, and it helps to pay for everything, and it helps to keep me focused. I'd like to thank everybody who has helped the show out and those who have supported us since the start. We are the most undermined and marginalised show on the internet for very good reason. I don't think there is anybody putting out this level of information. I know that there are people out there who have done, but I think the consistency of the shows that we're putting out, especially at the moment, are really honed down. And I think that the focus and the information is useful to the listeners. I am getting great feedback. And even when I put something on YouTube, which is not very often, please follow us on Odyssey and Spreaker, by the way, then the feedback I'm getting means that the enablers of all distraction are actually being undermined. And people are focusing, even if it's a small, select few. That is enough. So, thank you for listening, and good night.